The road to war. Dawn of the 20th century, Europe was a tangled web of empires, each with its own ambitions, rivalries, and ambitions. The British Empire, a vast colonial power, dominated the seas and held territories across the globe. The German Empire, newly unified in 1871, sought to assert itself as a global power, challenging Britain's naval supremacy. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, a multi-ethnic state, was grappling with internal unrest as nationalism stirred among its subjects. Meanwhile, the Russian Empire, despite being one of the largest in the world, struggled with internal instability and the growing discontent of its people. If you're looking to dive deeper into the history of the Great War, I've included a list of books, helmets, and other resources in the video description below. These are Amazon affiliate links, so if you're interested, you can purchase them directly. Whether you're looking to explore military history, the impact on society, or the aftermath that led to future global conflicts, these resources will help you dive deeper into the subject. Colonial expansion and industrialization were rapidly reshaping the global order, leading to fierce competition among the great powers. The Industrial Revolution made warfare more deadly, with the introduction of new technologies and more efficient production methods. At the same time, naval rivalries were escalating, particularly between Britain and Germany, both of which built massive fleets. The competition for colonies, particularly in Africa and Asia, further deepened hostilities. In Eastern Europe, the Balkans, often referred to as the powder keg of Europe, was a region rife with ethnic tensions and the weakening influence of the Ottoman Empire. Serbia, a nation seeking to expand its influence, had close ties to Russia, while Austria-Hungary saw the growing nationalist movement in the Balkans as a threat to its own stability. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in Sarajevo by a Serbian nationalist in June 1914 was the spark that ignited the war. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, triggering a series of alliance commitments that pulled the major European powers into conflict. Within weeks, the major nations of Europe, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, France, and Britain, were at war. The conflict soon spread across the globe, with battlefronts extending from Western Europe to the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. Chapter 2. The Western Front and Trench Warfare. The war on the Western Front quickly became a deadly stalemate. Germany's initial strategy, known as the Schlieffen Plan, aimed to knock France out of the war by invading through neutral Belgium. The plan was designed to quickly defeat France before turning to the Eastern Front to fight Russia. However, the Belgian resistance and the rapid mobilization of British and French forces slowed the German advance, leading to a bloody and prolonged war of attrition. By the fall of 1914, the war had settled into a grueling stalemate, with both sides entrenched along a line stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland. Trench warfare became the defining characteristic of the Western Front. Soldiers lived in miserable conditions. Mud, rats, lice, and disease were rampant, and the constant bombardment of artillery made daily life a nightmare. The Battle of Verdun in 1916, which lasted nearly a year, epitomized the horrors of the Western Front. Both sides suffered heavy casualties, and the battle achieved little strategic gain. The Battle of the Somme, which resulted in over 1 million casualties, was another example of the brutal futility of trench warfare. Despite new technologies, including tanks, poison gas, and flamethrowers, the war on the Western Front remained largely static. The horrors of trench warfare became emblematic of the conflict as soldiers endured unimaginable conditions in a seemingly endless cycle of attacks and counterattacks. Chapter 3. The Eastern Front and beyond. Unlike the Western Front, the war on the Eastern Front was more fluid and dynamic. Russia, which was unprepared for the scale of modern warfare, initially launched offensives against Germany and Austria-Hungary but suffered catastrophic defeats. The Battle of Tannenberg in August 1914 and the subsequent losses at the Masurian Lakes forced Russia into retreat, and German forces gained ground in the east. Meanwhile, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was also on the defensive, battling the Serbs and later the Italians, who had joined the Allies. The Ottoman Empire, which had joined the Central Powers in 1914, added a new dimension to the conflict, opening up theaters of war in the Middle East, North Africa, and the Caucasus. The Gallipoli Campaign, a disastrous Allied attempt to open a new front against the Ottoman Empire in 1915, resulted in heavy casualties and ultimately failed. Beyond the European battlefields, the war spread to Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, where European colonial powers fought to maintain control of strategic territories. These campaigns, while less well known, were significant in shaping the global course of the war. Chapter 4. The war at sea and in the air. The naval aspect of World War I was just as crucial as the land battles. The British Royal Navy, the world's most powerful, imposed a blockade on Germany, cutting off vital supplies and causing severe shortages of food and materials. In retaliation, Germany resorted to unrestricted submarine warfare, using U-boats to target merchant and passenger ships, including the famous sinking of the Lusitania in 1915, which killed 1,198 people, including 128 Americans. This attack angered the United States, which had previously been neutral, and contributed to its eventual entry into the war. The introduction of aerial warfare also marked a new chapter in the conflict. While early aircraft were used primarily for reconnaissance, they soon became involved in bombing raids and dogfights. The skies above the battlefield became yet another arena for deadly combat, with pilots engaging in one-on-one battles for supremacy. Zeppelins, giant rigid airships, were used by the Germans to drop bombs on civilian targets, bringing the war home to those far from the front lines. Chapter 5. The home front and economic struggles. The war had a profound impact on the home front, where entire societies were mobilized for total war. Governments introduced conscription, rationing, and strict censorship, while propaganda campaigns were launched to maintain civilian morale. The economic strain was immense, with rising inflation, food shortages, and labor strikes becoming widespread. War bonds and taxes funded the military effort, but the financial burden was staggering. Women, who had traditionally been excluded from the workforce, took on new roles during the war, working in factories, farms, and even in military support positions. Their efforts were crucial to maintaining the war effort, and the war marked a turning point in the role of women in society. The war also sparked a wave of social change, with labor movements gaining strength and challenging the established social order. Chapter 6. The United States enters the war. The United States, initially neutral, found itself drawn into the conflict in 1917. German U-boat attacks on American merchant ships, including the sinking of the Lusitania, had already angered the American public. But it was the revelation of the Zimmermann telegram, in which Germany proposed an alliance with Mexico against the United States, that finally pushed the U.S. to declare war on Germany in April 1917. American troops, known as the American Expeditionary Forces, AEF, began arriving in Europe in 1918. The infusion of fresh American manpower and resources was a decisive factor in turning the tide of the war. The Allies, bolstered by American forces, launched a series of offensives that pushed the exhausted German army back and eventually led to the signing of the armistice in November 1918. Chapter 7. The Russian Revolution and the Collapse of Empires. Russia's involvement in World War I was marked by internal strife. The war drained the Russian economy, and the country's military was plagued by poor leadership and lack of supplies. In 1917, discontent boiled over in the February Revolution, which forced Tsar Nicholas II to abdicate. The Bolshevik Revolution later that year, led by Vladimir Lenin, resulted in the overthrow of the provisional government and the establishment of a communist regime. Russia's withdrawal from the war was formalized with the signing of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in March 1918. This allowed Germany to focus its attention on the Western Front, but the Central Powers were already beginning to crumble. Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire were both disintegrating under the pressure of war, and Germany's resources were nearly exhausted. Chapter 8. The Final Offensives and the End of the War. In 1918, Germany launched a final series of offensives on the Western Front, hoping to break the deadlock before American forces could fully arrive. The Spring Offensive, however, failed to achieve its objectives. The Allies, reinforced by American troops, mounted a series of counterattacks, culminating in the 100 Days Offensive, which pushed the Germans back and forced them to seek an armistice. On November 11, 1918, the armistice was signed, officially bringing an end to the fighting. The world breathed a collective sigh of relief, but the war had left behind a devastated Europe, with entire regions in ruins and millions of soldiers and civilians dead. Chapter 9. The Aftermath and the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, sought to ensure that Germany would never again threaten European peace. The treaty imposed harsh penalties on Germany, including territorial losses, military restrictions, and reparations that crippled the German economy. The Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires were dismantled, and new nations were created in their place. The war had caused the deaths of over 16 million people and left an indelible mark on the world. Europe was left deeply scarred, with millions of displaced people and entire societies struggling to rebuild. Chapter 10. The Legacy of World War I. World War I, though intended to be the war to end all wars, ultimately sowed the seeds for future conflict. The Treaty of Versailles created deep resentment in Germany, and the unresolved issues of the war contributed to the rise of fascism and communism. The war also introduced modern warfare, with new technologies that would shape the future of combat. The war reshaped national identities and changed the political landscape of Europe, leading to the rise of new ideologies and powers. Though the horrors of World War I have been remembered for over a century, its lessons continue to influence global politics and diplomacy today.